Getting off on the left, I want to read a passage from your book and have you comment. You said sometime in the 20th century, the left traded freedom for other things. In the East, from Russia to China, Cambodia, and Vietnam, the quest for emancipation was swapped for a totalitarian egalitarianism. In the West, liberty was left to its enemies, abandoned in exchange for an ill-defined notion of fairness. The moment people believed they had to choose between freedom and fairness, between an iniquitous democracy and miserable state-imposed egalitarianism, was game over for the left. Explain what you mean by that.
Well, I'm saying this as a leftist, by the way, right? This is
well, me too. So we're in the same club.
Self-lamentation. When the left began kicking and screaming against capitalism at the very beginning, it was an emancipatory project. I mean, Marx and the Marxists and the trades unionists were all about liberating workers from the tyranny of exploitation. It was about liberation. It wasn't about equality. It wasn't about fairness. I mean, maybe they had a lot of those slogans as well, a fair day's wage for a fair day's work. But Marx, who for me was an eye-opener, was actually against the idea of equality. You know, he would ask pertinent questions such as equality of what? You know, if you have a disabled person needs more resources in order to have the standard of life that we have. So you can't ask for equality is not the issue. Liberation from constraints, liberation from exploitation, from the extractive power of the powerful. That's what the left should be all about. So the criticism of the left initially waged against capitalism was that capitalism restricts the freedom not just of the workers, but also of the capitalists. There is a beautiful, wonderful piece in this text in Marx's Grundrisse where he's waxing lyrical about the poor capitalist, how the capitalist goes to bed at night, unable to sleep because he's worried about bankruptcy. And even if he's a good man, he has to exploit his workers because if he doesn't squeeze the living daylights out of them, then he will become like them. So this is a tragedy for the capitalist class. So it's a purely humanist liberation movement. That's what the left used to be. Even when you look at it from the perspective of the feminists, of feminism. Feminism, remember what it was used to be called? Women's liberation. It wasn't about quotas that the CIA torturers in Guantanamo Bay had to be 50% men, 50% women, or that there should be, transgender toilets in Guantanamo Bay. That was never the issue for the women's liberation, the gay and lesbian liberation movement. So we of the left used to be all about liberty. And then we got stuck around the First World War. Around the First World War, 1912, 1913, 1914, the Great War split the left between those who were supporting the Soviet system and the Social Democrats. The Social Democrats became effectively ethno-nationalists, especially in places like Germany. They took the side of the bourgeoisie in that crazy trench warfare that was pathetic and pointless. The Soviet side, very soon after 1917, lost the verve, the urge to liberate workers from the tyranny of some boss.
There was that brief period with the Soviets where they achieved it.
2 years.
And then, of course, then the Bolsheviks destroyed it, which is why Chomsky calls the Bolsheviks counter-revolutionaries. But they did achieve it. That's the tragedy.
For 2 years. And this is exactly what Noam says, that for 2 years there were worker councils and there was, the idea was that now workers will have democratically to control their work, their workplace. They would elect their foremen and forewomen, and then after that, of course, it all became top down. And in the end, allow me to bring it back to my book. If you look at Gosplan, the Ministry of Planning, of Economic Planning in Moscow, what it tried to do, Chris, and this fascinates me and horrifies me and excites me and at the same time depresses me, is what Gosplan tried to do. It tried to do what the algorithm of Jeff Bezos is doing in Amazon.com. Essentially, the idea behind Gosplan, which was a very fascinating project if you look at it from a technical point of view, from a mathematical point of view, and I spent quite a few years when I was a young man studying it. What Gosplan tried to do was to replace the market by matching consumers with producers. And from the center, from Moscow, sending signals to a factory producing shoes, you will produce so many shoes at that price. And trying to match those shoes with the demand from consumers. But Amazon does this perfectly well. Back then, they didn't have the all singing, all dancing algorithm that now Amazon has. So in a sense, Amazon and central planning in the Soviet Union have a great deal of commonality. The difference is, of course, that in the case of Amazon, it's owned by Jeff Bezos, and it is optimized, the code, the computer program, the algorithm is optimized in order to maximize his cloud rent, whereas in the case of the Soviet Union was there to optimize according to the will of the Central Committee. So once we justified the death of the works councils, of the liberation of workers from not being the decision makers, as the left, that's what happened in the communist East. In the West, we also ditched freedom because the social democrats, who became quite significant and even won governments in places like Germany, and Austria, and Britain in the 1960s and 70s, again they replaced liberty with the concept of social justice, of taking some of the surplus value accumulated by the capitalists and giving it to the workers. But they accepted the tyranny of capitalism, of the marketplace, of the capitalist marketplace. So we of the left, whether we were communists or social democrats, in the end, did away with the concept of liberation. And who picked it up? The libertarians, for whom it is the freedom of the conglomerate, of capital, that is identified with the freedom of humanity, which of course is one of the greatest distortions of liberalism. So, I think that we of the left, we need to re-espouse freedom as our number one motivation.